we gonna make revolution social distancing? How we gonna make revolution away from one another? We have to be able to still get together, still talk, and utilizing the Zoom platform to have this Operation Power meeting is unprecedented. How we gonna make revolution from our houses? How we gonna make revolution social distancing? How we gonna make revolution away from one another? We have to be able to still get together, still talk, and utilizing the Zoom platform to have this Operation Power meeting is unprecedented.
Greetings. Welcome. Welcome. We're so pleased that you're joining us. You're joining Operation Power, and we want to welcome you with words of our people across the diaspora. So we say Jambo, we say Akwaba, which means welcome. We say Alafia, which means peace. We say Uhuru, which is freedom. We say salam, which is peace. Namaste, the divinity in me salutes the divinity in you. I'm your co-host. My name is Inez Barron, and I'm here with my husband, my co-host, the one and only, the unbought, the unbossed, the indomitable, the one of a kind.
Charles Barron, back at you, Queen.
Thank you.
And we say every week when we on that this is the love of my life, 42 years of marriage, the brilliant, the bold Inez Barron. And we just love bringing this information to you because information's not power, but the applied use of the information is power.
Thank you. So you are joining us on Operation Power, a voice of Black radical politics and revolutionary change. We're here talking with you about things that are happening, and we're bringing our perspective to it from having served in the New York State Legislature and the New York City Council. And we're just so pleased that you're joining us. And we know that in our tradition, we call on the ancestors to be a part and to bring their blessings on what it is that we're going to do. So we're going to have a libation video that we're going to share to bring on the ancestors.
First to our first ancestor, to that hidden one who, though hidden, manifests in all things as all things, that God, goddess idea in the universe by any and all names. To our first ancestor, we pour libation, Ashe. We pour libation too to our ancestors because they were the first people on this planet, mothers and fathers of all mankind, flashpoint of the human family. To those ancestors, we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to our ancestors because they were the ones who first gave birth to the idea of civilization, knew we would need a form of governance, and they nurtured that idea along the Nile until it reached its zenith in Kemet. There they built these gigantic monuments as evidence of that great civilization, and they carved instructions on the walls of temples and tombs for us, so we would never forget. To those ancestors, we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to our ancestors because over time they put together all the tenets of civilization and they took those ideas and left the continent. They were the people of the first Exodus. They left Africa and went all over the world and peopled the world. To those ancestors, we pour libation, Ashe. We pour libation too to our ancestors because they did not sit on their laurels. They continued to improve, continued to evolve, and at each point of evolution, they again would leave the continent and settle and resettle. They met them all coming and going. To those ancestors, we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to the ancestors left at home, the very young, the aged, the infirm, left to reinvent themselves, depleted of us, human resources. but they were enjoined by us in the diasporas, both objects of a global myopia that ruptured the soul of a people as it ravaged a continent. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation to those ancestors, because over time they began to remember who and what they were. Because no matter where they had been dropped off, they still retained bits and pieces of who and what they were. They retained that African core that described them. They began to remember bits and pieces of a song. They began to remember lines from a rhythm. They began to remember dances that they did in ancient times. They began to remember those ancient drum beats that they now beat out on bare skin. And so to those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation to them, because they then began to teach each other. They began to resurrect and reconstruct that history and that culture. They became the new Africans wherever they were. They became the new teachers, preachers, archaeologists, the new singers, dancers, the new drummers, the new Jaliyah. They reconstructed that history and our culture and became new Africans everywhere. So to those ancestors we pour libation. Ashe. Pour libation to those ancestors, because they are the ones who pass that information on to us. And so we pour libation to those of you who will watch this presentation. Those of you who are the recipients of that pieced together history, of that reconstructed culture. To you we pour libation. Ashe. Pour libation to our children and those yet to be born. For they are the ones that you must teach. And you can only teach if you know the history. So to you who are learning the history and are passing on that history, and to our children who are learning that history and will pass that history on to all eternity, but they will call your name in all eternity. To our children we pour libation. Ashe. Ashe. Ashe.
Thank you so much. That sister's so powerful. She talks about our history, the diaspora, and our being all across the world. And we know that wherever we are, we've got to find a way to come together. And we are so pleased to be a part of the Black Power Media Reloaded, coming to you each second and fourth Thursday at 7 p.m. And we hope that you'll be joining us on each of the occasions. As we said, the name of our program is Operation Power. And that's also the name of an organization that we started here in the East New York section of Brooklyn. And we're going to have a little video clip that talks about the origins of Operation Power and the purpose of Operation Power.
Operation Power stands for people organizing and working for empowerment and respect.
Operation Power is a grassroots social justice organization founded by local community stakeholders, which includes activists, organizers, and leaders who understand that the system as it is currently structured is destroying us and our communities.
The system, the capitalist system, one that promotes human greed over human need, one that promotes profit over people, needs to be dismantled. These local community organizers recognize capitalism needs to be destroyed and replaced with socialism.
Operation Power was founded in 1997 with the understanding that uprooting capitalism needs to begin locally. Operation Power understood that our communities are the perfect vehicle to dismantle this parasitic capitalist system brick by brick, and the economic, political, and cultural institutions and other systems in place in our local community infrastructure. Whether it's the local school board, community board, city council, state assembly, all represents mechanisms to control the destiny of our people.
In 1997, Operation Power launched the campaign Charles Barron for City Council that would lead to over 20 years of radical changes in the East New York community. These changes included over 20,000 units of housing affordable to our community, 3 $88 million schools, over $110 million secured and allocated for community parks, millions secured for library upgrades, and another $42 million for the construction of a new library.
Cultural programs such as the Juneteenth celebration, Kwanzaa programs, and reinterment of Sankofa Park, securing thousands of jobs for local residents.
We've secured political seats that include city council seat, state assembly seat, state committee person, male and female district leader, chair of the local community board members, campaigning and getting a judge from the community elected, county committee seats, block association presidents, tenant presidents, and much more.
And all this was done while being Black radicals. We are Black radicals, which means getting to the root causes of the problems challenging our community. We need to get to the root and not lose ourselves battling the symptoms of this vicious capitalist system, because we know revolution is the solution.
Operation Power believes in Black power for Black people. Black power is still needed and still relevant. Operation Power believes that Black radicalism is the only position we can afford to take, getting to the root of our problem for revolutionary change. Operation Power believes in community control for Black people as the only way to get to self-determination and liberation.
Operation Power believes that we need to move to a more socialist system, a communal system that doesn't suffocate but liberates. With these beliefs, we take collective action for our self-determination and liberation by being a part of Operation Power.
Welcome to Liberation Saturday.
That's Operation Power, and we say every week, the truth shall set you free, and power is the great equalizer. We know that our mission has to be for power. Yeah, we got to fight racism, but you got to be careful when you're fighting against racism, because you might be talking about being included into a colonial capitalist system that has created domestic colonies called Black communities. So that is our mission. And we understand this: the electoral arena is not a panacea. We cannot vote our way to freedom. It is a tactic. It is a strategy for securing goods and services for our people and raising their revolutionary consciousness for revolutionary action down the road or in the meantime. So with that, we want to say today we have two dynamite guests. We've been very excited, right? I know.
Yes,
so these two
young people,
folk to come on and give their perspective on what's happening with African Liberation Day and ALD Day. Some people don't even know it's happening. You know, it just passes and goes by. But the significance of ALD Day, the significance of Malcolm X, and most importantly, the significance of the Sahel revolution that's going on right now. So don't be so trumpetized that you don't realize that Africa is on the rise with revolution. So with that, Inez, you want to bring on our guest?
We're so excited. We're calling our program Youth Perspectives on African Liberation, on Malcolm X, and on the Sahel Revolution. And these are young people who are engaged, who are active, who are studying, and who are making moves to make sure that we're spreading the word and getting all of our people to know what's going on, because you certainly cannot rely on the mainstream media. You cannot rely on the mainstream TV programs and the news outlets. They are not bringing the message for our people about what's happening in Africa. So we're so pleased. We've got two young people. We have Sadiq Riley of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and we have Eliamania Ishmael from the Coalition for the Elimination of Imperialism. Yes.
And we
Thank you.
want to say to both of you, I was at the conference that y'all had at Medgar Evers College, and it was a tremendous success, a great turnout, and both of you made some powerful presentations in which attracted us to you and the work that you've been doing. So we'll start off with our sister. You can have some opening remarks, and then Sadiq, you come on and say whatever you want to say, and then we'll get into our specific topics. Eliamani?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Hello, I'm Eliamani, and I am a member with the Coalition for the Elimination of the Imperialism in Africa, and I am here today to talk about the Sahel, what's currently happening over there, and of course, some of the ways that we have been honoring the Sahel and supporting it during African Liberation Day. And we always want to make sure that we're putting the Liberation Day between Africa and Day. It's not Africa Day. That is an intentional way to try and distract us from the fact that we are not free yet.
Sadiq.
Peace, everybody. Hello, Eliamani. Good to see you. Much like Eliamani said, I'm an educator, writer, organizer in the city, mostly with AAPRP, but like Charles Barron said, I had the opportunity to do some work with the Palaver Collective and organize the Pan-African Summit last month, which I would like to consider also a huge success, raising money, raising consciousness and money directly that we can put towards revolutionary movements and organizations based in the continent, which we also think is great. Very excited to be here with seasoned and dedicated organizers. I'm reminded every day that I stand on the backs of giants, and I'm glad to be here and talk a little bit about ALD this past weekend across the globe, talk a little bit about Malcolm, talk a little bit about the AES and the revolutionary fervor on the continent at large. I think a lot of times, people or in isolation talk about the AES, and there's revolutionary movement all over the continent. So I'm glad to be here, glad to share some words, glad to share some space. And like I said, I'm always reminded that I stand on the backs of giants, and glad to be here with such dedicated comrades.
Well, we're glad to have you. While you're on, we'll start with you and some of the conversation. But a lot of our people are just trying to survive. I would say 95% of the people in the hood, they're just trying to survive. Could you give me a job? Could you do this for me or that for me? And trying to survive capitalism. So how do you, Sadiq, how do you bring a message to young people to let them know the significance of African liberation to their liberation in East New York, in Harlem, in Bed-Stuy? How do you help make that connection?
I mean, I try not to sound like an alarmist. I mean, first and foremost, I think I have to be in the street all the time. I have to be in the community all the time. I can't do it behind a screen or in a textbook or, just existing, not where the people are. I have to tangibly and materially be where the people are. I think secondly is, again, not to be an alarmist, but I try to remind people that we're at war right now. I think I saw a statistic the other day that said the police, there was only 4 or 6 days in all of last year where somebody wasn't murdered by the police, right? And, while we struggle with this here specifically as diasporic Africans in the US, our people struggle everywhere, and our connections are intertwined. And I don't think it's as hard to see or to experience as, mainstream media will have you believe. So, we try to draw these connections, whether that be with the blockade in Cuba and, the Africans in Cuba, whether that be the revolutionary movement in the AES. And, ultimately, I think people here care about freedom and justice, and they may have internalized that to understand, Black faces in high places or Black CEOs is like the solution to that. And I really try to debunk that myth. And it's really like, liberation for our people. It does not end here in the diaspora, right? It really does expand everywhere. And, you can't claim to care about equity and justice and liberation if your perceived freedom comes at the expense of people that look just like you everywhere in the world, right? That is selfish, right? That is, you are an enemy of your own people, right? And I think that really does strike a chord with people. And if you get people to really understand, if you get to talking to people about some of the things that are going on in the Sahel, right? Niger seizing assets from Canadian multinational corporations that are extracting the uranium and the French extracting the uranium and, using the electricity for their city at the expense of their own people, right? When you start talking about food sovereignty, economic sovereignty, and, ECOWAS, I mean, things just make sense. Like, liberation really does make sense. Freedom, sovereignty really does make sense. And they are tangible topics that people can wrap their head around. So yeah, I think it's twofold. I think it's staying committed, staying in the streets, using artistry, using film, using whatever method that is at your disposal, posting up a table outside the train station, but you got to continue talking to people, and you got to make sure that the connections are seen, because like I think Inez said earlier, the mainstream media won't give it to us. But people do care about our people deep down, and you got to stay committed. You got to stay committed. So that's some of the work that I try to do, And, the last thing I'll say, I don't want to take up too much time, but it doesn't happen. No individual can make it happen. I can't snap my fingers and bring about the liberation of my people. We need to get in organizations, and we need to work collectively to bring about our freedom and our sovereignty, to make sure we have what we need, our needs, right? So yeah, that's some of the first things that come to mind, thinking about how do I bridge these connections with people that are so, focused on their immediate material conditions, like housing, like police, like food, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Iliamani, you on a program we had you on before, you did such a fantastic job. Matter of fact, you're from Mali, right?
Yes, my mother is from Mali. My dad is from Tanzania.
From Mali. So tell us more about, first of all, we mentioned terms like AES and ECOWAS, but many people and the grassroots may not know what all of that means. So maybe you can talk a bit more about what that means and what this revolution, and it's not only Ibrahim Traore that a lot of people know about, but it's also Tichiani and Goita. They also are doing the same kinds of things. So why don't you put that in perspective for us?
Definitely. So the AES stands for the Alliance of Sahel States. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are 3 countries in the Sahel, sort of between North Africa and then the lower parts of West Africa, and then Central Africa and East Africa. And as much as we do know about Ibrahim Traore, because he's a wonderful leader and one of our formidable heroes currently, the AES was started with a rebellion in Mali with Assimi Goita, who's the current president of the transition in Mali. And basically, it was initiated because of the post-Gaddafi assassination terrorism that was unleashed in the Sahel after Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama decided to awfully unjustly murder the Libyan president. And their arsenals were taken over by terrorists in the Sahel. And that has contributed to the security situation that we see in the Sahel, which is the #1 hotspot for terrorism in the world right now, of terrorism deaths. And so that security situation was exploited by France, and France took that opportunity to put more French bases, put more French soldiers on the ground under the guise of, we're going to help you defeat terrorism. They did not help defeat terrorism. They had a lot of backdoor dealings with the terrorists. They promoted the terrorists from everything from politics to also culturally. In France, there's this very large festival for the men in blue, and the men in blue are the terrorists of North Mali, actually. So it was this really interesting dynamic, and Malians obviously got very sick of it. Terrorism and civil war brings these great material desperation, and they ousted their president Ibrahim Keita EBK at the time for basically working in the hands of the French, as Mali has been a neo-colonial satellite state of France since its Flag Day, more or less. And so they ousted that president, and Assimi Goita was the hand of that, and he was able to do it after some of the largest contemporary public protests that we've seen in West African history on the streets of Bamako, Mali. And so after about 2 tries of trying to get a new president in, Assimi Goita finally said that, what if I just stay? And the people rushed to the streets and said, yeah, because you're the only one that's actually putting out the people that we don't want to be in, and putting in people that, at least trying to put in people that we want to be there. So Assimi Goïta became not only a popular figure in Mali, but also throughout the Sahel. And I'm a Malian, and I also have a lot of close friends in Burkina Faso as well. And I remember during that period, this is like 2021, 2022, my friends would give me reports from Burkina Faso, and they were always saying, you know, Mali, just stay strong. We're going to come. We're going to come. We're going to come. Let's do this together. And so it was incredible to see Ibrahim Traoré arise. And he put out that terrible man that killed Thomas Sankara, of course. And he arose and he decided to join forces with Mali, knowing that, of course, two liberated African countries are stronger together than they are apart. And after that, Niger followed suit, and you know, it's falling like dominoes and may continue. So that's currently the Sahelian photo. And yeah, it's something that we can be very proud of.
Yes. But what does all of that mean? What does all of that mean to take out? And what do we mean by neo-colonial black puppets of imperialism? What does it mean to take them out? And what does it mean to not use the dollar as currency and not allow the natural resources of Africa? We always say that the paradox of Africa is that it's the richest continent in the world with the poorest people. And so Africa is not poor, Haiti's not poor. It's the imperialism and the colonialism and the neo-colonialism that make the people poor, because these are rich countries. So if you could speak to, you know, either one of you or both of you can take a shot at it, the importance of continuing that revolution from the 60s. You know, Kwame Nkrumah took over Ghana, but they took him out with a coup d'etat, not a positive one. This was an imperialist coup d'etat. These coup d'etats are people's coup d'etat led by the people. Lumumba in the Congo, he only had 6-8 months. He was assassinated. And then Ben Bella of Algeria, Ahmed Ben Bella in Algeria, he was taken out before he can complete his revolution. And of course, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania and Sekou Touré of Guinea. See, because we lived through that, because you see, we're kind of young, we're young heads, we lived through that. So now to see what Ibrahim Traoré and Tchiani and Goïta is doing, they like advancing even that, because now they have an opportunity to transform the economy. Both of y'all take a shot at that.
Definitely. I mean, what imperialism looks like in Africa, and particularly in these Francophone countries, and there is, you know, a large correlation with why the AES is happening in these Francophone countries. It's because France has been one of the most vicious, most obvious sort of neo-imperialist of contemporary day. And what that looks like is that France has the largest gold reserves in Europe, even though they have no gold. Where are they getting it from? Mali, of course. Right. It means that the Eiffel Tower is lit with uranium from one Nigerian village. Every time you go to the Eiffel Tower and you see those colors, that resource is coming from a Nigerian village. It means the CFA, the franc, I say the C is for the colonial franc, but it means that those reserves are held by France, that France literally dictates the currency for, I think it's 14 countries now, all, of course, formerly Francophone countries. It means that when you go to any of these Francophone countries, the number one media that you see there is Canal, which is, of course, a French media company. And France has their France Canal, and then they have their Africa Canal, and that's where you're getting most of your information from. It means that, in effect, France still runs all of the administrative and economic life of their quote-unquote former colonies. And what we know is that that is obviously not sovereignty. And so that's what imperialism looks like. So to have these three countries come together, these three leaders come together, kicking out the French military out of their countries and making more strides towards a safer security situation than France did in the last 11 years of when they were supposedly helping out with killing terrorists, and they were not doing that at all. That's a big deal. When kicking out mining companies from Canada and from France that were giving these Burkina Faso and Mali completely unfair deals, kicking those companies out is a step towards actual sovereignty, and of course giving give us our rightful shake of a contract, our rightful shake of the currency that is owed to us because it's coming from our resources. Actually telling the world about this nefarious dealing that France has with these three countries, but with the Francophone world as a whole, is a massive thing as well. People are, especially in the West, I think people are very beguiled by Francophilia. They love France and they love France, and they have no clue just how terrifying that country is, just how evil it's been to their people and Africans. I know that France really had one hell of a PR campaign with African Americans here, or whether we're talking about James Baldwin or so many traditions. And so there's sort of like this love between Black Americans in Paris, and it really obstructs this relationship that they have with our source, with our brothers and our sisters in Africa, and being really the foremost, strongest imperialist power, keeping Africa poor and keeping our people struggling and desperate.
Sadiq?
Yeah, Elimani did incredible. Some of that I wasn't even aware of. Only thing I would add to that is kind of to the point about neocolonialism that you mentioned and that you asked about, kind of the way in what that means and what that looks like on the continent. At the inception of, many African countries earning their independence, because they like to say they gave it to us, you would see sentiments by Kwame Nkrumahs of the world, like the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it's linked to the entirety of, the sovereignty and the independence of the continent at large, right? And what happens is, countries like France, like a Netherlands, like a Britain, like the United States at the time, who are extracting so much of our resources and, developing the wealth of their countries based on our labor and our land, they don't like sentiments like that. So, imperialism, the way it works, Elimani touched on some of the economics, but there's also, the military component, what we, talk about with AFRICOM, but essentially their end goal is to put in a leader, which we call puppets, right? That will continue to allow the extraction of our resources and, our people to be exploited, their bodies and our children, to continue to grow the wealth of, Western, hegemonic powers, such as, today or in post-World War II, the main hegemonic superpower is the United States, right? We see their work in the Congo and, some of the deals that were just announced this week. But yeah, so neocolonialism is really, a Black face that has been given a high position of power. And, they too, that individual person or their family or their friends may, see a lot of wealth at the expense of their people, right? And they will continue to allow the wealth of our great land, of our rich land, to be transferred over to Western superpowers. And again, talking about the AES, these leaders are channeling the spirit of some of our revolutionary, our ancestors that talked so much about a unified Africa through socialism, right? Through socialism, meaning that we control the destiny of our resources, and the wealth of our resources will be properly distributed through our people, right? So that's kind of combating some of and we still have a ton of neoliberal leaders, right? A ton that I would consider, and I think many would consider, enemies of the people, right? We see AFRICOM, and that's like the United States military wing. In Africa specifically, you see certain leaders that will allow them to set up bases and, in our countries, right, in our lands. And, it's always under the guise of bringing peace and stability to the region. But, kind of like Eliamani mentioned earlier with Gaddafi, right, I'm pretty sure that was one of AFRICOM's first missions, right, which led to so much terrorism in the region, right? So it's kind of this, again, paradox of, Western countries will say that they're trying to, they would be the catalyst for all of the violence and instability in the region, and then say that they're trying to bring peace to that same region. But we know it's a lie, and we know it's a hoax. And again, this boils down to our work, right? Our work is debunking these myths. Our work is making sure that we have a rich anti-imperialist framework rooted so deeply in our culture, in our teachers, in our workers, in our students, that we don't buy into these myths, right? And we can fight back, and we can elevate and support our movements like the one that's going on in the AES right now. That is truly, embodying that spirit of a unified Africa through socialism, right? We see the unification of these three states, and the sharing of resources and the investment in energy and infrastructure and mining, and making sure that our people benefit from our resources, right? There is no AFRICOM left, right? There is no French military in these places, right? So when we talk about getting rid of neocolonialism, ultimately what we're talking about is our people benefit from our resources, right? So yeah, just adding a little bit to much of what was already shared.
We're so pleased that we've got young people here who are knowledgeable, who are articulate, and who are involved and spreading the word. We know that revolution starts from the bottom up. We know that we've got to get our people informed and involved in what's going on, because they are not learning it. They certainly have not learned it in any of the settings of public education and private institutions as well. And certainly now there's a cloud of even talking about the legacy and what's going on actively in the African communities. We also know that the geographic boundaries of all of Africa were devised by the European powers. Let's carve a line here. We know that many of the groups of people were disturbed from what had been traditionally in their own historical geographic communities. We know also that now AES is saying, listen, we're going to be able to have at least our three countries, our three states come together, not requiring passports and visas and those kinds of artificial mechanisms that were imposed to keep us divided. How can you talk about a little bit about ECOWAS and the need for us to understand that they were an engine of the political powers, the neo-colonial powers, to keep people divided? And in fact, I believe I heard that they were threatening initially to have some movement against the AES states.
Absolutely, they were. Yeah, ECOWAS is very much one of those situations where, like Sadiq was saying, very high Black faces in imperialists in the imperialist system, junior partners of colonialism, and that's mostly what ECOWAS currently has going on. We know Tinubu in Nigeria, the current president of Cote d'Ivoire, of Senegal even. These are all presidents that work very, very closely with their colonialists. And even when they are sort of doing these new showy things, I think recently Ivory Coast said that they were going to kick out the French military, and Senegal said it shortly after. All of that is, of course, responding to the popularity, the people popularity that they're seeing from the same declarations and actions happening in the AES. And so that's something that we have to be very, very careful of too. These colonialism, imperialism can morph with the times, and they can turn into whatever they need to be to look like, at least, in order to get to that bottom line more efficiently. So they're very good at cloaking. But what we know about Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire is that Cote d'Ivoire has been offering themselves as a launching pad to the US, to General Langley, who recently put basically a target on Ibrahim Traore's head through lies. And they, very shortly after, just I think a week later, he was in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire with the current president, saying that they were going to, quote unquote, fight terrorism on the borders or something like that. We all know what that means, that they really just want, to have access to that very crucial border that they share with Burkina Faso. Senegal, same thing. I think they said recently that they wanted to exile French military or something like that. And, the next day they were on a plane with President Macron talking about the close relationship that they have and that France doesn't need to be worried, verbatim. And so, ECOWAS has been traditionally another mouthpiece for European or normal Western desires in Africa. And that is very much demonstrated by the sort of tensions that they've had with the AES when Goita first decided to kick out France and was taking over power and was showing that he was going to go in a different direction from just sort of the normal puppetry. It was Nigeria who said that they wanted to invade, or actually it was one country that said that they wanted. It was Nigeria. Yes, it was Nigeria that said that they wanted to invade, and they kind of had a vote. And I think by a hair, they decided not to. But they have offered themselves up time and time again to do Western bidding against the Sahelian actual, self-determination and what they've made clear they want to do with their countries.
I understand that there have been numerous attempts to try to take the life of Captain Traore, but that the people who have such a love for him and understanding of what it is that he's trying to do have in fact thwarted those kinds of attacks. Brother Sadiq, you might want to talk about any of that?
I do want to add one point to the ECOWAS point really quickly. And as I was listening to a podcast recently, I think it was with somebody from Black Alliance for Peace. I forgot the name, but they talked a little bit about how, again, some of the failures of ECOWAS and how it's essentially failed the mission, or what it set out to be at the onset. Because, and I'm pretty sure they said Sekou today, he warned about this before his death, right? He said ECOWAS needs to have a political platform, right? There's no way in which you can have an economic agenda for the continent and the sovereignty of Africa without a political platform. Economics are inherently political. In fact, Africa has been ravaged and pillaged of its resources due to capitalism and imperialism. And if you want to have an economic platform for the betterment and sovereignty of West African countries, it must be socialist. It must be. And ECOWAS has drifted so far from that, to Eliamani's point. It really is just a puppet, a talking point, another tool of Western imperialism. To your point about Captain Traore, I would just say, one of the things that I'm most blown away with, and Charles Barron, you probably felt some similar sentiments at the Pan-African Summit, is every single time I have a chance to talk to somebody that spent some time on the continent, on the ground, in the AES or in other parts of the continent, what they're most blown away with, what I'm always hearing, is how militant our society is. And when I say militant, I mean how deeply imbued an anti-imperialist ideology is seeped into the framework of society, right? Everybody knows who their enemy is. Everybody's ready to fight. All they say is we need the resources, right? Like, we're ready to go. I know Eliamani talked a lot about this on the women's panel, right? And seeing some of the women in Niger, right? So I would just say, to the point about Traore, even just seeing the way people came out to the streets on the 30th all across the world, right? All across the world, many different ages. And, the support is there. And, I think the contradictions are sharp, and I think consciousness is rising. And, like we say, we struggle to call this a coup d'etat. Western media always wants to say, military, but it's being led by the people, right? It's being led. This is following in the interest of the people, and, real material sovereign interest of the people. And you see it in the way in which they protect Traore. So yeah, I want to continue to applaud the masses, the people, for raising our consciousness, for doing the work, for protecting our leaders. And I encourage everybody, those in the diaspora, and to continue to ask yourself, what does my support look like? What does my protection look like? As we have to protect our liberated zones and our leaders. And yeah, you said you're so happy to see us as young people, but I'm so happy. I'm always so happy to be around committed comrades. I feel like I learned so much. My commitment is fueled by others' commitment, right? So yeah, that's my little spiel.
The feeling is mutual. The feeling is mutual. Matter of fact, we kind of young ourselves. We have young spirit, no matter how we look. Somebody in the chat said, Eliamani and Sadiq, you two are fire. So people are responding. You definitely are fire. And just for the record, ECOWAS, when you hear us say that a lot, is the Economic Community of West African States. There's about 14, 15 of them on the west coast of Africa. Matter of fact, it goes pretty along the Sahel region, which is a very, very rich region, rich in minerals. Cobalt, coltan, diamonds, gold. France is going to crumble when they can't rape Africa, because they have nothing up there. So they are in deep trouble, which means they are desperate. And we got to look out for when you get desperate. A wounded beast is very, very dangerous, but they are getting beat. And I'm so excited because I see the decline of the American empire, as we often say, from the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, when after World War II, or Imperialist War II, they all came together and said, hey, United States, we'll make the dollar king, back it up by gold. Ain't none of them had any gold, so where'd they get the gold to back up the dollar from? Us. And said that we'll start the IMF, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and then later on the World Trade Organization, the League of Nations, that came in 1920-something, and became the United Nations in 1949, all controlled by American imperialism and Europe. This is why they're upset, because now that empire is declining. The dollar is declining. And a lot of African countries are going to use their local currencies to deal with trade. So being that this is a great time to be alive, I'm excited. I'm 75. Inez is whatever age she wants to be, but she's older than me. But anyway, she's any age that she wants to be. As pretty as she is, she can be what she want to be. So it's like seeing the continuation of a revolution that was aborted, or shall I say major setbacks in the 60s with the COINTEL program and my party, the Black Panther Party, either jailed or murdered and political prisoners. So now we see the fruits of that labor is now coming into fruition now, and it's just an exciting time to be alive. I want to now bring it home now. We talk about ECOWAS and neocolonialism. Well, we're suffering from a domestic form of neocolonialism right here in America. And this is why we got into the electoral arena, because many of those that are elected officials, they're either in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. We registered in the Democratic primary. We have no connection whatsoever to them. They hate us and we hate them. So this is a good relationship. But let's talk a bit about the sellout, sycophant, Negro colonial puppets domestically, right in our United States of America. And that's one of the toughest battles for us to battle right now, because a lot of the colleagues that we had to deal with, we were alone in there. And when we would get up, you could just, the stuff we talked to you about on the radio, we said on the floor. We called them out on the floor. So how do we address now domestic neocolonialism, the Black sellout puppets, Black faces in high places right here in America?
Yeah, I was recently talking to a friend, and he was talking about how the term Black excellence, and I think it sort of came out of 2015 during the murder of Michael Brown, and there was like this era of Black Lives Matter and of reclaiming Black pride. And the term Black excellence came out, and everyone was very excited about it. And we sort of highlighted all of the amazing things that Black people do in the world. And it was very quickly co-opted by sort of the Black elite class, the Black capitalist class. And we see it still happening today, where the capitalist class will continue to shop to you Black solidarity or Black this, Black that. But what we know is that class solidarity is more often than not something stronger than racial solidarity, particularly for capitalists, because what they don't want for you to do is to be able to get the same amount of opportunity or resources that they have, because then in capitalism, they won't have any class to exploit, which is a necessity for their class. Reach the sort of class heights that they have. And so I think that it has been a very, very appealing sort of strategy to distract Black people with this idea of, if you're Black, that's it. Like, we know you're on our side and that sort of stuff. But, another phrase that became popular after Black excellence was not all skin folk or kinfolk. And so that has been something that's been very important in sort of recognizing what's happening, that the Democratic, the DNC party and the way that they continually pander to us about, racial solidarity, but they don't do anything when they get in the office. They don't actually support Black people in any material way. They just shop to us identity politics, and they put our faces on things, and we still can't eat. We're still going to prison. We're still getting shot. Our houses are still being taken by gentrification. Absolutely no material benefit has been given to us, but they go on stage and they say Black, and we're clapping for what? We have to start demanding actual material change and not just being recognized in spaces. Recognition doesn't do anything if it's not going to give us material change. And so I think that Sadiq, my comrade earlier, had said that liberation does not just end in the diaspora, and I'm sure he'll agree with what I'm about to say next, which is that I would argue that it doesn't even start in diaspora. I would argue that in the same way that Malcolm X said that it took a strong China to get Chinese people respect, it's going to take a strong Africa to get Africans respect in the diaspora. And that is definitely what it will continue to be. The idea that we can sort of have Black elite and Black capital out here in the diaspora sort of win liberation for us with just a little bit of money, and they'll give back and all that sort of stuff. It's not going to happen because we're still under capitalism, and Africa is the most necessary part of global capitalism because we need Africa to exploit for global capitalism. So if we're ever in that system where your source is being raped for resources, you're never going to get the respect that you want to in the diaspora. So
powerful. Sadiq?
Eliamani Carey, wow. I'm an educator, and I feel like I work with a lot of liberal folks, and I think it's fairly easy to get into a discussion about, you can just point out the contradictions. I mean, there's just so many, ultimately I'm trying to prove the point that at least in the political sphere, there's one party, it just has two faces, right? And people sometimes have a tough time kind of grappling with that. And it's like, let's just look at it. I mean, first and foremost, Trump used to donate to Kamala. Like if this is your binary, like, let's just start there, okay, let's get past that. Let's actually look at the campaign that she ran on, right? She ran on pro-fracking, pro-military. Also, she's a cop. Like, she quite literally was a prosecutor. Like, we could just not like, and this, we haven't even touched on the genocide, like the many genocides, but obviously right now, one that's probably the most transparent, most visible is the Palestinian genocide. And if you get to talking to people and you highlight the contradictions, it's hard. Joe and Kamala ran on the backs of George Floyd being murdered. Yet every year after that, the police receive bigger and bigger and bigger budgets. They kill more and more people, right? So you could point out the contradictions, and finally you'll get people to see what you're saying, and then they hit you with the apathy, and it's like, okay, but what do we do about it, right? The system's too big, the lesser of two evils conversations. And I think that's ultimately when you get to the main point, which is always my main point, especially in the last year or two, is you have to get organized, right? There is revolutionary work being done, right? It's not an imagination. It is being done, and you have the choice to be a part of it, right? I think what it comes down to in the diaspora is a lot of people, man, they just, to Eliamani's point, our liberation starts with Africa. A liberated Africa is a massive L for the United States, and people aren't really ready to think critically about what that looks like for their own personal comfort, right? Even those of us who struggle here, right? So, I tell people all the time, you got to get organized. You got to join an organization. You got to be committed to the work. You got to study. You got to be out in the community with your people. You got to build relations. You got to grow consciousness. You got to support materially. And that's what it's about, man. Like, that is what it's about. You love your people. And, to the Malcolm X point, like, Malcolm X loved his people so much, right? And especially post-pilgrimage, Malcolm, it was his understanding of his people broadened, right? It was so much so, and he was so committed to that, right? And I think a lot about him, and I think a lot about Kwame Ture, and when they have these sentiments, like, we must develop like an unshakable love for our people, because when you have that, it's not a choice about whether to fight. You have to fight. We're at war. They're exploiting us. They're killing us, right? You have to fight. You have to organize. There's no other choice, and I think it really does begin with that unshakable, unwavering love for our people, which comrades like Malcolm, comrades like Kwame Ture, they speak about. We must, and the system, the society, it will teach you to hate yourself. Very subtle. It'll teach you to hate yourself. You must develop an undying love for our people, all of our people, right? And then you see that it's not even a choice about whether I commit to revolutionary activity. I have to, So, you just got to stay engaged. You got to stay in the streets, and you're not going to win all of them, but you'll be surprised. African Liberation Day just passed. We was in Bed-Stuy. People walking by in the streets. What's going on? How do I get involved? Very beautiful sight. So, yeah, that's some of the things I'm thinking. But Eliamani carried. It was hard to follow that one.
That's powerful. We had honor. Oh, Eliamani.
I did want to say just, in terms of getting organized and contributing, definitely one of the things that I wanted to mention during the question on, how people are defending Ibrahim Traoré from these assassination attempts is when you go to Burkina Faso, if you're around the presidential palace, what you will see is people who are like laying outside with like broomsticks, with kitchen knives, like they are ready to fight and die for that president. It's really that serious. And one of the things that they had told to us when we did our coalition trip down there to the AES states was, we are ready to fight. We just need the resources. So just give us the tools because we already want to fight. And so we do, as the Coalition for the Elimination of Imperialism in Africa, we do have an AES Solidarity Fund where we contribute to some of these groups down there pushing the radical and revolutionary Pan-Africanist fight. So I'm going to put that in the chat, but if you are looking for a place to put your money directly in the hands of revolutionaries down there, then we are providing that space.
Great. And Brother Sadiq, do you have information about how people can contact your organization as well?
Yeah, I can put some information in the chat. AAPRP, you can find us anywhere, but I'll write the name. But we have a website. We're on all social medias, AAPRP. We have chapters globally, so you can pretty much find us everywhere. But also, I second Eliamani's point about the AES Solidarity Fund, doing incredible work, many of these organizations. But yeah, thank you.
Well, also, we want to say that particularly we personally had met Kwame Ture on several occasions, and David Brothers, who was also a very, very important member of the Black Panther Party and the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and to see the work that they have done over the years. And you know why it's important for us to do this? We're going to battle in the electoral arena. We're going to highlight the contradictions, and we're going to say to our people, particularly revolutionaries, consider the local elected offices. Get out the neo-colonial black puppets of the Democratic Party, particularly in our communities. Inez and I did it for 21 years. Yes, we were alone, but we still were able to deliver schools and parks and jobs and food. And at the same time, we had to adhere to what Amilcar Cabral said. He said, bear in mind, the people are not struggling for ideas in your head. They're struggling for material benefits, for a future for their children, mask no difficulties, and tell no lies. So we need to say to our people that a black face in a high place is not black power. It is not black progress. Look at New York. The Attorney General is black. The head of the Assembly is black. The head of the Senate is black. The mayor is more blue than black. The public advocate is black. Borough presidents are black. Union leaders are black. Yet black poverty is high. Black unemployment is high. Police are still off the hook. $11 billion budget. We have $116 billion city budget and a $254 billion state budget, and 30% poverty in black communities. So we need to revolutionize from the bottom up. That's when revolution is going to take place, from the bottom up. And the beautiful thing about you two, you brother and you sister, is that your work is not in vain. I put on a T-shirt of Ibrahim Traore, and I was walking around the track in East New York. Brothers and sisters would say, that's that African brother who's rocking him, huh? I said, yeah, they identified. You know, I didn't have to go up and do a whole lot of rapping. They said, yeah. And everywhere I went with the T-shirt on in East New York, brothers and sisters that's just trying to survive, they knew about Ibrahim Traore. So if you have a website or anything, you know, put it in the chat so that we can make sure that people can get in touch with you. And if there's any other announcements you want to make about anything coming up, we're going to close it out with your words and your announcements, and then we'll wrap it up. We got a few minutes left.
Yeah, no, definitely. Please do contribute to the AES Solidarity Fund. We give the money directly to a couple of different groups in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. I would also say, if you guys want to stay up to date with the happenings in the AES, Burkina 24 is a really good news outlet from Burkina Faso, giving up-to-date daily information. And also Burkina Books, at Burkina Books on Instagram, is a wonderful organization, one of the ones that we actually donate directly to. And they are also giving up-to-date information. And yeah, continue to stay engaged, organized, and of course, give your resources and money when possible to our brothers and sisters fighting on the ground.
Yes. Well, brothers and sisters, and for listening, we thank you so much for tuning in to Operation Power. And listen to us tomorrow at 5 to 6 p.m. on WBAI. We're going to have Dr. Small with us talking about the same topic. Get one of them old heads out there and see what they got to say.
Intergenerational.
Intergenerational. So we're going to have Dr. Small tomorrow. He's going to be on WBAI from
.org.
WBAI.org, 99.5 on your FM dial. And we'll be listening out or hoping that you'll, what?
Friday at 5.
Friday at 5 to 6 p.m. on WBAI 99.5 FM and WBAI.org. So we say every week, the truth shall set you free. And power is the great equalizer. Black power.
Black power.
Good job.
Thank you.
Ancestor, ancestor, take my hand, ancestor, lead me on, ancestor, let me stand, ancestor, I get tired, ancestor, I get weak, my nose I get warm, ancestor, through the storm, ancestor, through the night, ancestor, lead me on, ancestor, through the light, ancestor, take my hand, ancestors and